Hi everyone. So today's video is all about menstrual cycle. So what is menstrual cycle? Menstrual cycle is the periodic shedding of the endometrium which occurs in case of the primate reproductive females at an interval of 28 or 29 days. That is menstrual cycle. Or you can also define it as the cyclic reproductive changes in the primate females at an interval of 28 or 29 days is called a menstrual cycle. Now in case of all the primate females, so the menstrual cycle begins at a particular age around 12 minimum, 12 to around 13 or 14. So that first menstrual cycle which occurs in case of the human females or primate females is said to be the menarche. So why this menarche or menarche occurs in case of the primate females? Menarche occurs due to increase in the gonadotropin releasing hormones. So that is the first stage where the female attains puberty. And thereafter, due to decrease in the GnRH levels or FSH and LH levels, there is a stoppage or cessation of the menstrual cycle that is called as menopause, which occurs generally at the age of 45 to 54. So in case of the females, from the age of 12 to the age of 45 or 54, that entire period is said to be the reproductive life, where a female is able to give birth to an young one. So thereafter, menstrual cycle is all about in case of primate females. Whereas in case of the non-primate females, there is another cycle which occurs. That is what we call it as estrous cycle. So estrous cycle generally occurs in a different species. There is a variation of the time. But in case of the menstrual cycle, the time is being limited. The days are being limited up to 28 or 29 days. But on an average, what we are telling is 28 or 29 days. So that is said to be on an average. But it may extend up to 35 days even. Okay. So that is menstrual cycle. And estrous cycle, depending upon the species, it varies. And the main difference between the menstrual cycle and estrous cycle is, in case of the estrous cycle, there is a period that is called as heat period, during which the female becomes sexually urged to that of the males for the mating. And in case of menstrual cycle, there is no such phase which is being seen in case of the primate females. So that is one of the difference. Whereas the number of phases, if you consider, both are same in the menstrual cycle as well as in the estrous cycle, where there are 4 phases. Here also there are 4 phases which we include as ovulatory phase also. So there in the estrous cycle, it is first one is a proestrus, diestrus, metestrus and diestrus. So first one is proestrus, thereafter is metestrus, estrus and diestrus. Whereas in case of the menstrual cycle which occurs in a primate females, there is menstrual phase, bleeding phase, thereafter we have an ovulatory phase, and the last one we have the post-ovulatory phase. So how this menstrual cycle will occur? What are the changes are being seen? Where the changes occurs in case of the female reproductive system? So that we'll discuss in detail now. So as I said, in case of the menstrual cycle, so the entire cycle is of 28 days, of which the 14th day is said to be the ovulation. So based on the ovulation, the entire menstrual cycle can be divided into pre-ovulatory and post-ovulatory, which means before ovulation and after ovulation, which means pre-ovulatory phase is of 14 days and post-ovulatory phase is of 14 days. Now, in case of this menstrual cycle, so this menstrual cycle entirely is being synchronized by 2 entities. First one is the ovarian cycle, the other one is uterine cycle. Means what all the changes occurs in the ovary and what all the changes occurs in the uterus. In the ovarian cycle, the changes are the growth and development of the follicles, that is the first one. Thereafter is ovulation. So these 2 changes occurs in case of ovary. Meanwhile, in case of the uterus, there is functional what we say, the regrowth and shedding of the endometrium takes place. So that occurs in case of the uterus. So that is, one is ovarian cycle, the other one is uterine cycle. So as I discussed that in the menstrual cycle, two main phases, pre-ovulatory and post-ovulatory. So what happens in case of the pre-ovulatory? So that we'll discuss. So in case of the pre-ovulatory phase, the first phase is said to be the menstrual phase, or it is called as bleeding phase. So this bleeding phase occurs for 1 to 5 days. So why this bleeding occurs? This bleeding occurs due to lack of progesterone. As we have already discussed in the earlier videos, that is due to lack of progesterone, okay, the endometrium, which is meant for the implantation, so that endometrium gets ruptured, and thereby the blood starts oozing out from the vagina, from the endometrium into the vagina. So that is due to lack of progesterone, the bleeding phase or the menstrual phase is being seen, where the secondary oocyte which has been released from the ovary is not being fertilized. Okay, so remember that lack of progesterone results into the bleeding phase, which occurs 1 to 5 days. And it is being said that each day a female or a girl loses around 40 ml of the blood during this particular phase. And during this phase, the hormones which are there, so hormones such as FSH, LH and estrogen. You can see here the FSH levels, okay, so FSH, LH, thereafter is estrogen, as well as the progesterone levels are extremely low. Okay, and here very important point is, generally whenever we have a cut on our body, we have the platelet factors. We have thrombokinase, thromboplastin or fibrinogen, calcium ions, which are being involved in the clotting of the blood. So there in the external injury, if there is a cut, okay, or in an incision takes place, then the blood starts clotting. But here in case of the endometrium, even though the endometrium is being ruptured, the blood will not clot. That is because of an anticoagulant that is called as fibrinolysin, which prevents clotting of the blood, and thereby it allows the continuous flow of the blood in case of the first phase, that is bleeding phase. Right. So next is the phase is said to be after bleeding phase is the follicular phase or pre-ovulatory phase, or also called as proliferative phase. So this phase occurs right after the bleeding phase. As I said, in case of the bleeding phase, the unfertilized egg, okay, that is being phagocytized, thereby the bleeding phase occurs. So this particular phase can be even called as, funeral of unfertilized egg, or it is said to be the weeping of the uterus, because the secondary oocyte which has been released is not being fertilized. Henceforth, weeping of uterus or funeral of unfertilized egg. Right. So next is soon after the bleeding phase, that is from 6th to 13th day. What we can see here, from 6th to 13th day, this particular part, we can see that it is being said that it has a follicular phase. So what happens in case of the follicular phase? In the follicular phase, there is increase in that of the FSH, LH as well as the estrogen hormone. But remember, progesterone levels are still low or less. Okay. So now, how there is increase in these hormonal levels? So as we have discussed earlier, that during the FSH, during the follicular phase, okay, under the influence of the FSH, follicle stimulating hormone released from the anterior pituitary, the size of the follicle grows on increasing. So primary, secondary, tertiary, and finally the Graafian follicle is being formed. So while explaining the structure of a Graafian follicle, I have mentioned that the theca interna cells, okay, so they are having LH receptors. So when they have the LH receptors, when the anterior pituitary releases the LH, so that LH comes and binds to the LH receptors. So once this binding takes place, then the theca interna cells start secreting androstenedione. Thereafter is the granulosa cells which are present, so they start secreting an enzyme called as aromatase. Okay, so that enzyme converts this androstenedione into estradiol. So that is estrogen synthesis occurs. Okay, in case of the Graafian follicle. Later what happens is, okay, so we are discussing now in case of the ovary. In the ovary, under the influence of FS, LH and estrogen, the growth, development and maturation of follicle starts. Now, around 10th to 14th day of the menstrual cycle, what happens is the follicles are growing in case of the ovary. So when many number of the follicles are being growing, it may result into multiple ovulation. But that does not occur in case of a normal female. So how other follicles are being regressed? What is the reason? What happens is when the theca interna cell starts secreting the 17-beta estradiol, at that time initially it gives a negative feedback to that of the anterior pituitary. Thereby there is a decrease in the FSH levels. So whenever that FSH levels starts decreasing, you can see in the diagram here, when the FSH level starts decreasing, the other follicles which are present in the ovary, which are attaining their size, so they start regressing, and thereby only one follicle starts increasing in its size, and that becomes the dominant follicle. Is that clear? Thereafter what happens? The theca interna cells which are present in the Graafian follicle, so they continuously synthesize estradiol. Thereby, okay, the dominant follicle which is present, that synthesizes 17-beta estradiol. So that estradiol which is being synthesized now, okay, that is during the 12th or 13th day, it starts giving positive feedback to the pituitary, anterior pituitary. At that time, there is increase in that of the FSH and LH levels. So you can see here in the diagram, LH and FSH level starts increasing. Is that clear? So that occurs in case of the ovary. Okay. Next, what happens in case of the uterus? In the uterus also the changes are being seen, that is under the influence of the estradiol or the estrogen. Okay. Endometrium which has been ruptured in the menstrual phase, that start getting repaired or regrowth. Okay. Thereafter is the arteries which are there, they start coiling and they start forming spiral arteries. You can see in the diagram here, they start coiling and they start becoming spiral arteries. Increase in the uterine glands takes place. Uterine glands are meant for nourishment of the implanted blastocyst. So that uterine gland, the synthesis and formation starts in case of the follicular phase. Thereafter is thickening of the mucous membrane. Mucous membrane starts increasing and the mucus is also being secreted here, but to some extent. And this mucus which is being secreted by this mucous membrane is hospitable to that of the sperms. So that occurs during the follicular phase. So these all are the changes which occurs in the uterus, and these all, that is growth, development and maturation of follicles, occurs in the ovary under the influence of the hormones FSH, LH, estrogen. Okay, and their progesterone levels are still low. Now, when the the anterior pituitary is stimulating more and more FH, so you can see there is the increase in the peak. So on the 14th day, so this occurs, this follicular phase occurs up to 13th day. On the 14th day, the levels of LH goes on increasing. So when the LH levels increases to its max, so that is what we call it as LH surge. So due to which the granulosa cells which are present in the Graafian follicle, which increases intrafollicular pressure, so that pressure increases, and thereby whatever the secondary oocyte is present in the Graafian follicle, so that comes out. So when that comes out, so that process already we have discussed, that it is the process of releasing of the secondary oocyte from the ovary is called as ovulation. So that ovulation occurs due to LH surge. Meanwhile, the estrogen levels are also increased up to 13th day, and thereafter the 14th day they start decreasing. Later, you can see in the box I have written that increase in LH is there, FSH is also to optimum, estradiol also starts reducing, and progesterone is totally nil. Okay, so this is all about the follicular phase as well as the ovulatory phase. So this is the first half, that is pre-ovulatory phase. Now let us discuss post-ovulatory phase, also called as the luteal phase, also called as secretory phase. Why it is called as luteal phase? Because here the luteal cell formation occurs, luteal phase, as it is after the ovulation, post-ovulatory phase, as there is secretion of the progesterone, secretory phase. So this phase occurs from 15th to 28 days. So what are the changes occurs in the luteal phase? What are the changes are being seen in case of the Graafian follicle? So the ruptured Graafian follicle which is there, okay, so this ruptured Graafian follicle consists of the theca cells as well as the granulosa cells, but it does not have the oocyte inside because already it has been ovulated. Now under the influence of the hormone, that is LH, okay, so initially when the oocyte is being released, the cells are being damaged, the blood vessels are damaged, henceforth the blood oozes here, and that is what we call it as a blood filled follicle or corpus haemorrhagicum. Later this corpus haemorrhagicum now starts getting converted into corpus luteum under the influence of the hormone LH. So what happens here is the theca cells and the granulosa cells which are present under the influence of the luteinizing hormone, they start getting converted into luteal cells, and once the luteal cells are being formed, so that cells are yellow in color because of a pigment called as lutein. So the entire structure, that is corpus haemorrhagicum, now converts into a temporary endocrine gland which is yellow in color, so that becomes a corpus luteum. And approximately it is being said that around 18th day or around 18th to 20th day, the corpus luteum is being formed, which is filled with the luteal cells. So once the corpus luteum is formed, it starts secreting progesterone. So progesterone is a hormone, a steroid hormone, responsible for maintaining the pregnancy as well as the endometrium. So the secondary oocyte which was there earlier, which has been released into the oviduct, if that gets fertilized, then this progesterone which is there, so this progesterone starts maintaining the pregnancy. By chance, the secondary oocyte which has been released into the oviduct, if it does not get fertilized, then the progesterone which has to maintain the endometrium. Why the endometrium has to be maintained? That is because the secondary oocyte which will be releasing on the 14th day, there is a possibility that if it gets fertilized, then it has to come and get implanted into the endometrium. For its nourishment, all these changes are being made during a follicular phase. So by chance, if fertilization takes place, this fertilized egg will go and bind to that of the endometrium. Later it gets nourished, thereafter it becomes embryo, and later the process goes on. By chance, if it remains unfertilized, then what happens is, okay, the progesterone levels, increase in the progesterone levels will give a negative feedback to that of the hypothalamus. Thereby there is a suppression of the hormones, and thereafter the progesterone levels starts decreasing. So this decrease in the progesterone levels, okay, in the endometrium, what happens is, this decrease of the progesterone will make the endometrium which had been regrown, so that gets ruptured, and again the bleeding phase occurs. So this change occurs in uterus. Then what are the changes which occurs in the ovary? In the ovary, the corpus luteum, okay, so that yellow colored body now starts regenerating, and thereafter it starts becoming white in color, so that is called as corpus albicans. So during corpus albicans, the levels of progesterone will be less, okay, and thereafter is the FSH, LH levels and estradiol levels are also less. So that is what we can depict in case of the graph also. So this is how all the reproductive cycles occurs in case of the primate females at an interval of 28 or 29 days. So this is all about the menstrual cycle, where I told you the first menstrual cycle is said to be menarche or menarche, and the last menstrual cycle or stoppage is called as menopause. Okay, menstrual phase, follicular phase, thereafter is the ovulation and the luteal phase. So this is all the cyclic. See, this is continuously occurring. Every month it occurs where the endometrium regrows, endometrium ruptures. If fertilization takes place, endometrium retains, thereafter it becomes a site for implantation, thereafter growth and development of the young one. If fertilization does not take place, rupturing of the endometrium, and this cycle continuously occurs in case of the primate females. Okay, so this is menstrual cycle. Thank you.